Jon Snow and Daenerys Targaryen are two of the most interesting characters in A Song of Ice and Fire, both as individuals, but more importantly to me, as mirror images of each other, because these two characters are inverses of one another who go on the same exact journey. And the fact that these two characters are mirror images of each other leads me to get so frustrated when people try to pit them against each other. Because yes, I do think that ultimately they play two technically different roles within the context of the story, but that does not mean that they are diminished. If one character plays one role and the other one plays another, that does not lessen the other character in any respect. And so I get frustrated when Dany fans try to put down Jon Snow fans, or Jon Snow fans try to put down Dany, because guys, they're both important. They're the same character. If you like her, then by default, you should also like him. And if you like him, by default, you should also like her, because they're going on the same damn journey. Remember, the book series is A Song of Ice and Fire, and these two, either are or deal with those two big elements in the plot. Daenerys and her dragons are the fire of A Song of Ice and Fire, as George has said repeatedly. Jon Snow is fighting the ice of A Song of Ice and Fire. That is his whole goal. That is what he is focusing on. So these two characters, they are the plot. As I was rereading their first chapters in A Game of Thrones for the podcast, which, hey, don't forget, I was struck by the way that they mirror each other in their first chapters, how their situations are genuine inverses of one another. At the center of their inverse beginnings are the ideas of social status and then of wealth and or privilege. So for example, Jon Snow over here, his social status is lesser. He is a bastard. So it does not matter, what he has around him. People see him as a bastard, and that, inadvertently sets him at a disadvantage. But only in the sense of against the nobility, because at the same time, while his social status is quite low, he is being raised amongst a lot of wealth and a lot of privilege. Jon's entire journey during this first book is realizing the fact that, despite the fact that he is a bastard and has always felt inadequate because of that, when compared to his brother Robb, for example, the noble legitimate birth, he still actually got a pretty solid deal. He was trained in a castle. He never wanted for food. He had immense wealth and privilege that not everyone gets. And so he's immediately set apart in the Night's Watch because of all of these extra legs up. The inherent privilege that he started out with set him at a different level than everyone else. And then Daenerys is the complete opposite in those two respects. Her social status is quite high. She is a Targaryen. She is a princess. She is of noble birth. And so you would assume that because she is of such a high status that she would have privilege to match, but she doesn't. Because unlike Jon, she did not grow up rich. She did not grow up in a castle with all of this immense privilege. She grew up on the run, begging with her brother, going from place to place, hoping that people would put up with them, and then, being scared children. The security that Jon felt in his upbringing, if not in his social status, she never felt. She never had that privilege. She has been poor her entire life. And so because they start off in these inverses of each other, because Jon is socially low class, but privilege and wealth-wise very high, and she is socially very high class, but privilege very low, they start off with very different attitudes, but eventually kind of meet in the middle. Because for Jon, this has unfortunately kind of instilled a little bit of arrogance in him, a little bit of a victim complex. And this isn't to say that he doesn't have genuine grievances. He does. He has been made to feel insecure his entire life. And also, the other big thing that we ignore with these characters is their youth. He is 14. She is 13. They are very young. They're allowed to have these, ugly feelings. So when I say that Jon is arrogant with a victim complex, I mean in the sense that, hey, he's a 14-year-old teenage boy. Of course he's gonna have those. But because Jon has always seen himself as lower because of his social status, he isn't always aware of the privilege that he has had, and so he has an arrogance to him. He knows that he's good, at least, in comparison to these other Night's Watch boys, but he doesn't stop to consider why he's good, what he had that they didn't have, because in his mind, he's no different than them, because he doesn't know what it's like to grow up without. And so Jon's entire journey in this first book is learning to gain that awareness, to be able to say, like, oh, yes, I was disadvantaged in one way, but I was obviously very advantaged in another. Intersectionality, y'all. Because one can be privileged and still be going through it. Please, I beg of y'all, especially in this time period, remember that. But because of the unique situation that Jon finds himself in, he has no lack of confidence. In fact, he has too much confidence. It's something that he needs to unlearn as he goes on. That arrogance that he starts off with, he needs to kind of humble himself a little bit. He needs to learn that, yes, I did have a leg up in some ways, and so rather than feeling bad about myself, allowing this victim complex to exist, I should acknowledge that, hey, I actually have really good things that I can pull from because of my upbringing, and I can share that with the world. I can become a leader because that is what I can use that privilege for. I can use those skills that I attained to become a better leader, to become a better person, and better the people around me rather than, selfishly hoarding and guarding that. And so while Jon kind of needs to eat a slice of humble pie, Daenerys is the opposite. Because she has always been aware of what she has lost, there is this melancholy to her, there is this sadness, there is this meekness, because she doesn't have a reason to be loud and big and boisterous. She has been raised with the idea that she needs to accept what she has because that's all she has. It's so heartbreaking in the beginning when they're discussing her being married off to Khal Drogo and the terror she feels. And what's so depressing is in her head, as she's dealing with these feelings, these intense, like, I'm a 13-year-old, I don't want to get married to a fucking adult. The only thing that she can think of is like, oh yeah, I guess I just always assumed I would marry Viserys because that's what Targaryens do and I wouldn't have a choice. She is so used to not having choices, to not having autonomy, the privilege of autonomy, to be able to go through the world making her own choices because it's never been afforded her. And so unlike Jon, hers is a journey of like coming into her own power, to finding her voice, to getting louder, to getting bigger, which is such a fascinating inverse. He needs to come down and she needs to come up. But they're both heading in the same direction. They're both having to level out almost because they are going to be called upon to be leaders. And they do. They become leaders, ironically, in the same place. Because remember, at the end of Storm of Swords, that's when Jon Snow becomes the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, and that's when Dany decides to be the Queen of Meereen, that she's going to stay there and learn how to rule for a bit. So they both, spend the entirety of those books like climbing, learning how to navigate the complexities of their individual situations now that they've done their growing from book 1. And then at the end of book 3, it culminates in them achieving those leadership positions. And once we meet them in A Dance with Dragons, they are in their positions now. They have both, adjusted, gotten to the place where they can be in those positions, and now they are learning how to rule, side by side, but on opposite ends of the world. Both of them learn about the compromises that need to be made in order to rule, the messiness of it, because none of these decisions are clean cut, and there are consequences every time one of them makes a decision. And this is another reason I get so frustrated when people criticize either of them, because they're both making mistakes, because that's both the point. They've achieved these leadership positions, but they are not perfect at that point. They're still growing. They had to grow to get to the point where they could achieve those positions, but once they have achieved them, they need to grow in those positions as well. Both of them are pursuing peace in a way that isn't liked by the masses. Jon is trying so hard to make peace with the wildlings that he is causing friction with the Night's Watch, with the Westerosi. Daenerys over here is trying to basically make peace between the masters and the slaves. She wants the slaves to be free without the masters' oppression on them. And in both instances, you have the more powerful group opposing them and them having to make these concessions that aren't always popular. And so no, the decisions they make in those roles are never clean cut. They are never always the perfect choice, but they are the choice that inches them closer to the ultimate goal, which is survival with dignity. Whether it's wildlings or slaves, these two are doing everything they can to protect an underclassed group of people. Because long term, it is in the best interest of those people and the world. Even where their stories leave off in A Dance with Dragons, with Jon being dead and Daenerys having gone into the Dothraki Sea away from Meereen, we have both of these characters removed from their position of leadership and now going forward having to contend with it in a new way. Jon and Dany are the same. Okay, goodbye.